Welcome back to Inflection Point, where we cover everything succession and exit plan related. I'm Kevin Conner, the CEO of the Retirement Planning Group. We're a dedicated fee-only, 100% fiduciary firm that manages a little over $2.5 billion that falls under the Cetera family. And with me, I've got my good buddy and co-host, Tom Saboto, who is Cetera's Corporate Development Director. If you're listening to this podcast is really tailor-made for advisors, and we're out to demystify what it looks like for building a succession plan or an exit plan, how it works, what are some of the pitfalls and the things that you could be doing, and some of the things you could be doing to set yourself up for future success.
Hey, Kevin, it's great to be back again. I always enjoy doing these podcasts with you and trying to help the audience understand how to exit, how to sell their business. I think today it would be great if we could spend some time discussing how advisors can become more attractive to buyers. I think that's a really important topic because the word attractive can be defined many ways, depending on the seller and the buyer.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think that's a good place to start. I was giving some thought to this, and I can basically give a cheat sheet of about 5 things I think that really make advisors ultimately more appealing to a potential buyer. One of the things I want to start with, because you and I have talked with hundreds and hundreds of advisors that have started the succession planning process or have been interested in full exits out of the business, and what does that look like? And one of the things that, I think as you're entering into this, there's a lot of industry publications that the number of acquirers or buyers to sellers, I've seen things, there's 50 or 100 buyers for every one seller out there. And one of the things I've noticed is that's really important, and I want to make sure advisors and owners of firms understand this. As you're entering into the process of building succession and looking for someone where your ultimate succession would be or an exit, you're very much in an interview process with the buyer, okay? The buyer ultimately is going to could be writing checks for $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, $5, $10 million. And that buyer is looking at, well, are you a team player? Are you going to be a personality fit in our organization? And I think sometimes advisors see those 100 potential acquirers, and they think, well, I've got 100 opportunities at this. And it's, you've seen this as we've talked to advisors in the past. It's super important for them to have some level of humility as they're walking into the process, because it is very much an interview process. As much as they're interviewing, say us, are we a fit for them?
Yeah.
We're looking back and saying, are you going to be a fit within the organization?
Yeah, and when you mentioned that topic about what people may be reading in magazines, that there are 100 buyers, right? That doesn't mean they're qualified buyers, right? That doesn't mean that they're capable of buying your business. And it could be very distracting if you're thinking that way, that, wow, there's 100 people that would be interested in me. And then, of course, the key to the success of that is when you say what makes you appealing, right? You can't go into this process saying, well, I have 100 million or 50 million or 200 million, and that makes me appealing. That's not the appealing part. What's appealing is whether or not your business is the right fit for the buyer, and that your business fits in well so that your clients are in the best home possible as you exit the business.
And so that kind of bleeds into philosophy a little bit. Early on in the process, it's important for an advisor or an owner of a firm to figure out, is there a philosophy fit to how we're managing the accounts? And to know what that philosophy is early on is attractive for a buyer because they can quickly figure out if there's going to be a fit. Let me dig into that a little more. What is not a good fit is if potentially your client experience, if you're looking to exit the business, is significantly different than the client experience of the firm that's getting ready to acquire you. If there's a breakdown there in how what the clients are used to, experiencing within your own firm, it might not translate well to the firm that's buying, and the buyer will look at that as a risk. And so going in and knowing, who you are and what you do, and being able to identify That and position yourself with the acquirer can help you become more appealing if you're giving some thought in advance. Because you hit the nail on the head. I have 100 million and I'm doing X amount in revenue and my margins are Y. Like that is just the math.
Yeah, that's the
just
math part. Right. And oftentimes I think when we talk to advisors, many advisors think, well, I'm sorry, but you have to follow the same exact methodology of what I was doing to manage these accounts because no one else does it the way I do it, or this is the way my clients want it. So I think, again, that sets people up for a failure in the stages of looking for a buyer, because you can't expect that buyer to guarantee you that they're going to manage those accounts exactly the way you've done it. Right.
Yep. And
it's unrealistic for you as a seller to think that's what you should be hoping for in the end. What you should be hoping for is that you're getting a fair valuation. Your clients are going to be in great hands. Do no harm to the clients, but don't think like, hey, and I hope that this company continues to manage the portfolios exactly the way I've done it.
I like to think of it backwards. If you have $100 million under management and another gentleman or woman in town comes to you and says, I have $15 million, this is how I manage all the money, and you're going to have to adopt how I do it and change your whole firm.
Yeah.
That's the conundrum.
Yeah.
And really what it comes down to at the end of the day is being open-minded as you're walking into the process of what it could look like.
Yeah.
And not too set in your ways, because again, that doesn't go to team player. That becomes a cultural concern for the buyer of will they fit in within the organization that we've built, which is, again, most of the times typically bigger.
Right.
The bigger firm is acquiring the smaller.
Well, yeah, firm. And if you're a seller, you have to really just take a step back and understand it is emotional for you to get to this stage in your life where you're thinking about, I'm going to sell my business, or I'm going to phase out in the next 2 to 3 years, right? It's very emotional. I mean, every buyer understands that, but your big question you should be asking of any buyer is, how well are you going to treat my clients? Mm-hmm. And what can you show me about your firm where your customers are really happy here, right? Yeah. When you as a buyer can say, let me show you some information about how my clients are really happy at this firm, and I could show you the proof of that. That's the opening, right? You're like, wow, if those clients are happy there, maybe this is really a great place. And it's not just about my 100 million, it's about making sure those clients stay in the seat after the sale.
That's part of the deal. So the third thing to be more appealing is really knowing your numbers. You got to know your numbers. And one of those numbers that's really important is if you can demonstrate net new asset growth every year, that's very attractive. Now, that might be because you're in a niche business and you only service this sort of clientele, and the acquiring firm doesn't have that niche business built inside of it. That's very attractive because you've mastered a way of getting net new assets in the door, and that helps with the organic growth of the firm. We've seen scenarios, right, where it's flat, and that ultimately hurts valuations, okay? So if you go into it knowing your net new assets, that's very helpful. One of the things we also see, the fourth thing that I think can help you be more attractive to a potential buyer is a lot of this comes down to giving this thought in advance, not just limping into it very, haphazardly. Knowing what you want your role to be post-transaction. I talk to a lot of advisors, and I call it 19 hats. They maybe it's a staff of one, maybe they're completely solo, maybe they have 2 or 3 staff, but that advisor is typically wearing 19 hats. The owner of the firm wears 19 hats. They're doing billing, marketing, trading. They're opening out account apps. They're literally doing it all. They're paying the rent, the books, the benefits. They're figuring all of this stuff out on their own. A lot of the advisors we talk to want to get back to doing what?
They just want to meet with the client, right?
Yep.
Follow the financial plan. Make sure the client calls them for every financial need that they have in their personal life or their business life if they have a business
Yeah.
that they run.
They want to get back to their roots.
They
where
want to
they
get back
started.
to, just being happy, right? Get
Yeah.
back to the fun part
Yep.
of it. And we hear that all the time. I'm tired of regulation. I don't want to deal with all the other things of running the business. I just enjoy talking with my clients.
Okay, so let's spend a minute talking about an actual real life case study of an advisor that put it off and waited and waited and waited.
It's a good idea.
This was an advisor that was introduced to us, and I'm not going to say where this advisor was in the United States, but we'll say in the western half of the United States. And he'd built a really great practice in a pretty remote area, if you remember. It was a very small town, but had been very successful inside this small town. And he had no real path to succession within the town. I mean, there was just no one that was really going to be stepping in. And he'd actually tried it, if you remember. He had one advisor that he'd been grooming for 5 years, and it didn't work out.
Didn't work, right?
And the advisor ended up parting ways, and he was left back at square one. So he started down this path. But he woke up and he was like, he was roughly in his early 70s, I think. And as I mentioned just a couple minutes ago, every year you're getting older, so are your clients. And he came to us and said, "Look, I'd like to join your firm." And so we started the due diligence process, and we started digging in and learning a little bit about his practice. And again, a great practice. It had some tax help in it, and it was very attractive, very planning-based practice. And checked a lot of boxes. But we got to analyzing, and you mentioned this as well, knowing your client numbers and how old the clients are. And we found out that his average client age, I believe, was in the mid-70s.
They were a little bit older than him, I think.
Yeah. And for our listeners, our audience, the part of the math that goes into that is how long, if a business is purchased, how much longer will those revenues continue? It's just a basic business decision. And if you have clients at an average age of 55, you might guess that's obviously worth more, right? Because those clients are 55, they're still likely accumulating, not decumulating assets. Average age of 75 is likely not growing the asset base. And, that advisor didn't have any, the second question to that then typically is, well, do you have any second generation clients in there, right?
Right.
And we've seen that as well.
Yeah. Well, if I remember this one correctly, the answer to that was not very promising, right? There was some second generation, but look, his clients were older than he was, so the second generation were already coming upon some similar time frame, right, where they were getting ready to retire, many of them from their own business, from their own work.
Yeah. So I think sometimes, every day goes by and we're not thinking about it. There is 100%, there is an absolute sweet spot in there where you need to be really thinking critically about your book of clients, where they are in their stage of life. If you wait too long, what will happen is the valuation on your firm will be discounted to make up for or to account for the likelihood that those revenues are not going to be around as long as say a firm with an average age of 55.
Right. Well, and then obviously a person that we were discussing this case study, going back to your original comment about what makes it appealing, right? I think I oftentimes I want to ask someone like, well, what do you think your business is worth, right? Because that perception of that asset.
Yeah, it's based off of I managed 200 million and it does this much in revenue, so it's worth X.
Or I heard it's going for X multiple. Okay, well, we need to kind of bring you down to earth a little bit and realize in your case, it can't be.
Well, so that. Yeah, right. The behind the scenes numbers that oftentimes you don't see those in the headlines of the publications, right? It is average age of client. What's your average billing? How long have the clients been with you? How complicated is your business? What does your internal support team look like? all of these are part of the math that goes into creating that. And to be more appealing, understanding, like we talked about earlier, understanding the numbers, and some of the other intricacies of the business really go a long way to how appealing you are to a buyer. And at the end of the day, you're trying to come up with things that are more appealing to a buyer other than just here's how much money I manage and here's what my revenues are. Because that is just like we said earlier, that's just the math.
Yeah. Well, imagine if I think we could flip it around sometimes and ask them, if you were us, would you be interested in buying a business that had 75-year-old clients as the majority of the clients? Right. Their answer would probably be no.
Right.
Right? Because they know there just simply isn't a long runway left to work with those particular clients. And then a client that's 75 years old is pretty stuck in their ways at that point in life, right? They don't want to go
through a big change.
Yeah. Right? They oh my God, I've worked with Jim for so many years, and now he's not going to be there, right?
It's important to get ahead of these things. Yeah.
I guess the answer would be, if you're going to make your business more appealing, start sooner.
Right?
Because you can't have this expectation that, I'll just wait until I hit X number of assets and then I can just sell it and get a great multiple. It doesn't work that way.
No. So the last thing I'm going to spend some time on here is don't put it off. And what I mean by that is every advisor, we all get a day older every day, obviously, and guess what's happening? Our clients are getting a day older as well. And one of the analytics that will be done on any practice will be, what is the average age of the client? And if your average age of your client gets older and older and older, they're looking ultimately as a business decision, they're looking at the lifetime revenue that's still left with that family and the risk of generational attrition within the organization.
Well, it's funny you brought that up because that was just on my mind about when you talk about what makes you more appealing to a buyer. Knowing your numbers, right? It's not just knowing how much assets you have, but it's knowing how many times we've been on conversations where we've asked the seller, what's the average age of your client? And if they say, I don't know, I'll have to get back to you on that, right? That made you less appealing because now the buyer is thinking, okay, is this really just about getting a check? Or do they really know their business?
Yeah.
You should know that number.
Yep.
If you're running that business, you should say the average age of my client is 62 or 63 or 57, whatever it is.
So absolutely. So, to recap real quickly, 5 things. It really is going to come down to, know that you're going through an interview process, knowing your numbers, philosophically aligning, being able to demonstrate growth, and then having an idea what you want your role to be like post-transaction.
Well, I can't wait for you to talk about the interview process because I think that's an interesting topic, depending on whose interpretation of who is interviewing who.
Yeah, 100%. So we will dive into that in future episodes. So if you're concerned about how your clients and staff are taken care of beyond your working career or how you monetize the business you've spent years building, then we'd really encourage you to subscribe to Inflection Point, where again, we cover everything that's going to be related to succession and exit planning. Thank you for listening today.